Is it better to dig or leave your dahlias in the garden over winter? This year, I dug my dahlias, and LaRonda is planning to leave her dahlias in the ground for the first time. And we're going to get into why we made the decisions we did.
So in the past, we have just about always dug our dahlias. There was one year that we didn't. I think that was 2021, and we lost all our dahlias. We had a plan. We covered them with straw. We covered them with tarps. And I think what happened is we took it off too soon in the spring, and they made it until spring, and then they rotted. So that kind of turned us off from just leaving them in the garden. So digging the dahlias is a good idea if you are in zones 3 to 7, just because the ground will probably freeze and that will kill your dahlias. It's also a good idea if you have clay soil, which holds moisture a lot more than sandy soil does.
The next step would be to lift them gently with a garden fork. And I like a garden fork better than a shovel because you're not as liable to chop off, the edge of a tuber or something. And then you just gently lift them and get the excess dirt off.
So because we had heavy clay soil, and Rosita still has heavy clay soil, we usually let them dry for a day or two, up to 5 days, before we put them into their totes. That's just so that they're not soft and wet when they go in, which makes them more subject to mold. But here in Arkansas, I tend to just put mine right in the totes because the soil mostly falls off of them when I dig them. And we would recommend not to wash them before you put them in storage, just because I think it helps them store better. There's people that do wash them and divide them, so everybody just kind of has to find what works for them. But we found that works well for us.
And then we'll store them in a covered tote, and I like to use the 18-gallon totes, just a plastic tote that is opaque. I think that helps with storage. And our method is to layer in newspaper and then several clumps of dahlias and pour a bit of vermiculite over the top of that. Another layer of newspaper, another layer of dahlias, a little bit of vermiculite, and then the top, I just put a layer of newspaper on top yet before I close it. I try to get as many packed into a tote as possible, but they can get terribly heavy. We like to store ours in a cool, dark place, and we've used unheated garages. I currently have something like a root cellar that works excellent. The main thing is to just, store them between 40, 50 degrees. You don't want them to freeze, but you don't want them to be too warm because then they'll sprout prematurely.
And then we do like to just check them a few times during the winter if we remember, just to make sure they're not molding or too dry or whatever. If they're too dry, I have usually spritzed a little water in there to kind of help them out. I don't know if that helps. If they're moldy or if there's some that are rotting, we like to remove them so it doesn't spread to the other tubers.
My dahlia tubers, when they grow down into a clay layer. You honestly could make a mug or a plate or something out of my garden soil. So that stuff it stays stuck around the tubers. And I mean, this is really gross, but there'll be worms in my dahlia clumps.
Yeah.
There's no way I can get that soil out without damaging the tubers or spraying them. So I just leave it and I try to dry them out a little bit. And then I think the moisture in that clay helps to keep the tubers, it regulates their moisture too, I think. They're almost never shriveled and dry. If you are leaving your dahlias in the ground over winter, there's a couple of things that can help, which, we didn't have success the first time, and LaRonda's trying this again, so this is just what we found.
Take it with a grain of salt, because we're not saying what to do. I'm just telling you what I'm going to try.
Right. There's 2 threats to keeping your dahlias in the ground, and one is if they freeze or if they get too wet. Dahlias do not last. They will not overwinter if they get frozen. Tulip bulb, that doesn't really matter. But dahlias are different. If the tuber freezes, the thing is toast. And then they will rot if they are too wet. It's probably a good idea to wait until a killing frost before you start winterizing your dahlias. Then you cut them back to the ground and remove netting and supports.
So once you have them cut back, you can cover them with a layer of leaves or straw. If that's all you're doing, make sure it's a pretty thick layer. Additionally, you can also cover them with tarp if you have clay soil or if you get a lot of rain. Probably would be a good idea to cover them with something to keep the moisture off. And then you can remove that tarp in the spring when you start to see new growth coming through.
The reason I choose to dig my tubers is because I am in zone 6 and it's a little harder to overwinter in zone 6. I think there are people who've done it, but to me, it's easier to dig them out every year. I can multiply my stock that way as well. I have several seed dahlias I'm trying to multiply, so that's one of the reasons. But also, my soil is just too heavy. There's too much clay in my soil for them to overwinter well.
That was the loudest Myron you ever did hear. So I am choosing to risk leaving mine in the soil this year for several reasons, but I do have very sandy soil which drains well. We are on the top of a hill and the garden is slightly sloped, so that helps as well. We can tend to get a lot of rain in the winter here, so I was a little worried about it, but then I thought back and I thought, even the times that we got 6 to 8 inches overnight, I went out to the garden, and in Ohio that would have been a swamp for at least a week, and here it's just not the same. The water drains away very quickly. My beds are a little bit raised as well, my dahlia beds, so I'm just hoping they don't get too wet this year. I'm in zone 7B, which if I cover them with a good layer of mulch, I'm planning to do leaves and then possibly a tarp if I get to it, but I'm not too worried about that either. The ground doesn't freeze nearly as deep as it did in Ohio, so I actually had one overwinter in the garden a couple years ago that I didn't do anything to. It was just all by itself out there. Nothing to cover it, and it did wonderful the next year. So that kind of gave me courage to try it this year. I'm mostly doing it to cut down on a lot of work next spring, but if I lose them all, I'll let you know. All right, are you okay with that take? I feel like I was stilted and stopped.
I stumbled every which way.
Let me see how long. All that hard work. Too deep. Do they need to be that deep? It's a good lift.